Well, good afternoon, and welcome to our last study in the series on what we've called the post-Patmos letters. Remember, we call them post-Patmos is because these are the final three letters written by the Apostle John, the last living eyewitness to the resurrection of Jesus Christ. John, Paul, and what we find here in these letters that they call them post-Patmos is because remember, this is towards the end of John's life. All the other apostles have been martyred, been put to death. You know, they're wondering how come Jesus permits John to live out his life, to become an old man so that he could write these final three letters. Well, one, I think, is so he could write these final three letters. But also when Jesus looked down at the cross, who was the only apostle who followed Jesus all the way to the foot of the cross, willing to die right there as his Savior, Jesus Christ, was dying on that cross. It was Mary, Mary's sister, and John. And so I believe that John had nothing to prove as far as his loyalty to Jesus. And so therefore, he being the youngest of the 12, but he's the one who's going to live the longest. And so remember, he gets off the island. A lot of people don't realize this. Because of a warning in Revelation 22, it says, do not add to this book. And that's exactly what the warning is. Do not add to the book of Revelation. Because it is God's full revelation of the future. Don't be messing with the future. But it's not now, don't write any other books. And so as we shared with you before, Domitian had arrested John in AD 95 or so in Ephesus. Remember how John ended up in Ephesus? Remember with Jesus, when he was on the cross, he had a little discourse with John. Basically he said, John, this is now your mother. And Mom, this is now your son. Basically, John, you take care of Mom. Well, what happened was in Acts 7, you have this explosion of this persecution against Jewish believers. Now remember, Mary is the mother of the one causing all the problem. She's a marked woman. So John wants to get her out of Jerusalem as far as he can for her safety. So he takes her all the way to Ephesus in Asia Minor, modern day Turkey. And that's where basically she dies in AD 48. That's where he will later write the Gospel of John. But that's where basically he's also arrested by Domitian. Remember, Domitian is a Roman emperor who ruled after Nero. If Nero hated Christians, Domitian doubled that feeling. And so Domitian was the one that arrested John there in Ephesus and exiled him to that penal island right on the coast of Ephesus called Patmos. And while John's on Patmos, of course, he receives a visit from Jesus and receives the revelation, the book of Revelation. But remember, we shared with you that Domitian basically is assassinated by his officials. So much so that the Roman Senate overturned many of his edicts, and one was John gets off the island. So John goes back to Ephesus, his home church, and that explains how we get the book of Revelation. If John never got off the island, how would we ever get the book of Revelation? It would have been fish food along with his body. And so he returns with the book of Revelation, and he delivers those 7 letters there that Jesus dictates in Revelation 2 and 3. And then the rest of the letters written and read to the church. Well, now he's getting to be an old man. And like all of us old men, our patience starts getting thin. We start getting really fatherly. And our filters start getting thin as well. We just kind of say it. And John is very concerned because now he's dealing with these young believers, third generation believers. First generation, second generation, there's a lot of persecution going on. And persecution has a way of purifying the ranks, right? Why would you want to be one of those Christians when all those Christians are getting arrested and beat up? So they didn't have a lot of trouble with false teachers or false leaders because false teachers, false leaders didn't want to be a part. It was too dangerous. But towards the close of the first century, we find that there is actually a lifting of the persecution. Well, that's good news. But the bad news is guess who swarms into the church? False teachers as well as false leaders. So John's watching this whole thing, fatherly type. And remember, Tertullian told us he never married, never had children. These were his children. And he sees them threatened by these false teachers and false leaders, and he gets to it because he's the elder, the presbyteros. He's kind of like the loving bishop over all these churches there in Asia Minor. And he sees what's going on. So he writes, remember the first letter, because they're fearful that they may not be believing right, because they're being told Jesus was not the Son of God. God did not take on a body. You don't have sin. That's simply your body, and you can't do anything about it. The real you, your spirit, is always pure and good. So salvation is when you escape this prison of your body. There's no sin, no need of forgiveness. Do you see some tension with the gospel? And so he writes 1 John to give them the assurance, oh no, you have eternal life. You have a relationship with the Father. And he gives you those 3 spiritual birthmarks. Remember on how you know that you are a child of God, with a heavenly Father engaged in every detail of your life, working all things together according to his wisdom for his purpose, because you want to be like Christ. Why do I want to be like Christ? Because he's the guy. Remember? He's the guy that not only provided a way for us to have a relationship with our Creator as a father to a son, a father to a daughter, but also he's the guy that showed us how to do the very thing that we have this deep desire to do, and that's honor God as our Father. We don't have any idea. That's why we have 30,000 denominations all fighting each other on how to honor God as Father. But Jesus is the one that heard the Father say what? At his baptism? This is my beloved Son in whom I'm well pleased. He says it again in Matthew 17 as transfiguration, when he simply says, this is my beloved Son, whom I'm well pleased. Listen to him. That's why we follow Christ. Because the more I'm like Christ, then the more I'm going to be able to honor the Heavenly Father. So remember, the first spiritual birthmark is that the commands of Christ are no burden to me. They're friends. They help me understand how to be more like Christ. Why? So I can do the deepest desire that I have to honor God as my Father. Second birthmark, remember, is I look at people differently. The Spirit of God in me causes me to recognize something I didn't recognize for that much before, is that people bear the image of God, people's dignity. We treat people differently. That's the second birthmark. Third birthmark, remember, we realized we didn't figure Jesus out. It's not an algorithm. It's not because we're so smart. It's the fact, remember, Jesus even said, it's impossible for anybody to believe the gospel. It's impossible for anybody to recognize who Jesus is. A little Jewish rabbi, 5'6", 2,000 years ago, and he's everything you tell me he is, and he does everything you tell me he does. The story's unbelievable, and Jesus admits it. And John 6:44, when Jesus said, no one comes unto me, then what did he finish the verse? Unless the Father draws them. And how's the Father going to do that? Next verse, verse 45. For the prophets, Jesus says, the Father in heaven, he will cause them to learn of, recognize who I am. And so I've studied all kinds of apologetics and reasons and prophecy and so forth. But I believed in Jesus Christ before I did all that study, because it's the Father that caused me to recognize. That's why Paul says, you heard the gospel, you believed, you were sealed by the Spirit. It's the Father in heaven. Why is he doing that? Because he's populating the gift. What gift? Remember Daniel 7? He's populating the gift of a kingdom he's going to give to his Son. And he wants this kingdom to be packed with people who adore and love and honor and worship his Son. And that's why it's been 2,000 years he's been populating the gift. But that's the third birthmark. We recognize the truth about who Jesus is. Well, then, he's been talking about love. Remember, this is John. Jesus first nicknamed him and his brother sons of what? Sons of thunder. He had a little bit of a temper. And you do know as you get older, some of those old habits come back. Well, John, really, the way he writes these books, he's just face to face, straightforward. I mean, if he thinks you're a liar, he'll call you a liar. I mean, I love it. I just can't wait till I'm 80. You know, you call people liars. But anyhow, he's just very straight, very honest, because he doesn't know how much time he's got left. So he's not playing games. He's just going to tell the truth. So after he's been talking about love, and yet he's got this temper side, but he's known as the apostle of love. Remember when he couldn't walk anymore? Jerome tells us they would carry from church to church. And what was his one message? My little children, love one another. And remember, he repeated it 3 times. And when they pressed him on saying, why don't you say anything more? There's so much more stuff we want to know about Jesus, because you're the last living eyewitness. And all he would say is that this is the command of the Lord. And when this is done, it is all sufficient. The mark of the Christian is the way we treat people. So everybody understood, so much so that they talk about love is like in the Gospel of John, the 21 chapters. There you basically have he uses the word love 45 times. Now, in 1 John, at those little 5 chapters, 46 times. So he emphasizes love so much in his first letter that love is this mark that you can know that you have a relation with God. But now, 2 John, remember last week is, whoa, time out. Some of you are taking this a little bit further than you're supposed to. Because you're loving anything, and whatever's out there, you're loving it, and you're not loving with truth. Remember, it doesn't say, now just get out there and just love. No, Jesus says, you love one another as I have loved you. So remember, last week we saw in 2 John, just 13 verses, but he gets right to it, that you have love and you have truth. Jesus is full of grace and truth. Love and truth. You can't have love without truth. You can't have truth without love. You got some people, they've got all truth, but they sure don't have any love. They got people that got all this love, but they have no truth. Like we say, some churches, some are really full of light and pretty cold. And others are pretty warm, but pretty dim with the light. And the idea is that we love the way Christ loves. That simply means, remember, how do you manifest love? 1 John 4:10, he said that we initiate actions of self-sacrifice to meet real needs. But here's the kicker. Who establishes what the real needs are? See, if I simply initiate action of self-sacrifice because I'm such a loving person, now I'm going ahead and thinking the real need is, well, this guy may be a false teacher, preaching against God, perversion, preaching against Christ, basically damaging people's eternity. And I'm saying, well, but he needs to be encouraged. And so I have him in my home and I want to encourage him. And that's when John says, don't you have them in your home? And don't you give them a greeting? Because their need is for someone to speak the truth to them. That they're basically serving the devil himself. That's their real need. And that's how we love in truth. So, yeah, I recognize your worth. So I move to initiate actions that may cost me something. But I will meet the need you have that God says you have. And I don't make up what your need is. And I don't necessarily even believe what you say your need is. I let God tell me. Remember the word truth, aletheia? The word aletheia, truth, simply means not to forget. Not to forget what? Not to forget what God has said. Well, not only do you have these false teachers coming into the church, and so 2 John is, don't you be encouraging, don't you be supporting these false teachers. Because if you do that, you're participating in their evil. And remember verse 8, you're going to lose some of the reward that God wants to give to you. Go back and reread 2 John. It's only 13 verses. It takes 7 minutes, all right? But today we finish the study with the third and final post-Patmos letter, 3 John. Because now he's going to deal with, there's another issue. Since persecution's lifted off, not only you got false teachers coming to the church and teaching false doctrine and proto-Gnosticism, but he also got people who with an A personality view themselves as leaders, used to leading people. They're coming into the church and taking leadership. And everybody's so intimidated because we all got to be loving. Love. And so anybody who wants to be in leadership of our churches, sure, we're a loving church. Come on, take leadership. And now John says, let me deal with that one. And he does it again with an open letter. Remember, that's a letter you write to an individual you trust who will read it to the rest of the church. So in the same way that he did in 2 John to this lady that he esteemed very much, he wrote the letter knowing she would read it to the rest of the church. Here, now he's going to write to a man named Gaius. He says, verse 1, the elder, the presbyteros, the aged one. He's got the spiritual care of these people. He's concerned about something. So he's writing this letter to the beloved Gaius. 4 times he's going to refer to this Gaius as beloved. He says, whom I love in the truth. Same phrase he used for the woman. Who I so love, value, care for in the truth. I want to be moved to meet the needs God says you have. He has. Now, this Gaius, we're not too sure who this guy is. We got 3 of them mentioned in the New Testament. We got one that's in Corinth. We got another one that traveled with Paul from Macedonia. And then we got one in Derbe. It was a common name, like John. It was a common name today. Gaius was a common name. So we're not sure which one this is, but this guy, John, really cared for, as a father would care for a son, or a grandfather for a grandson. He says, "Beloved, I pray that in all respects you may prosper and be in good health, just as your soul prospers." Now, this is like a normal greeting. May you prosper. May you be blessed. God bless you. But John does a little interesting twist here. He says, may God bless you, and may you have physical health, just as you have spiritual health, that is, your soul prospers. How would you like it if your physical health was tied to the health of your soul? How many of us would be taken out in stretchers? And what makes for a healthy soul? Well, read on, because this guy's got a healthy soul, and people see it. Verse 3, "For I was very glad when brethren," other guys, "brethren came, and they bore witness. They told me about you, and about you to your truth. You are living in truth." Now again, let's break out of the metaphor. What does that mean? What does the word aletheon mean again? Not to forget. This guy's living his life so people can see he's not forgetting what? What God has said. What God has said. Well, how does that become really visible? Well, what's the greatest of all the commandments of what God has said? Matter of fact, you remember, just by way of review, just want to make sure you don't forget it. It's a dream I have that you don't forget things I teach. But it's when that lawyer comes to Jesus in Matthew 22. And this lawyer's been having these arguments with the Sadducees, and Jesus wins. He always won, but he wins again. And so Sadducees, they're so ticked, they do what we all do. They hire a lawyer, one of the Pharisees. And so this lawyer comes to Jesus, and he's going to test him. Now, you lawyers, we all know, you never ask a question that you what? You already know the answer, because you're always testing. So here, this lawyer comes up. It says in one of them, verse 35 of Matthew 22, he says, in one of them, a lawyer asked him a question, testing him. "Teacher, what's the greatest of all the commandments of the law? What's the most important thing God has ever said?" That's the question. Now, that's a good question. And I would like to hear what Jesus, the Son of God, says. And Jesus says, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind." And of course, the lawyer knew he was going to say that. And so it's like the lawyer's going to turn away, and Jesus says, wait, I'm not done answering the question. He says, "This is the great and foremost commandment. And a second is like it, as important as it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. For upon these two commandments depends the whole law and the prophets." These two commandments, because they're one commandment. How so? Well, it's interesting to me, and I've shared this before, but just for review. You remember Paul in Galatians chapter 5, verse 14? Paul says, "Do you want to fulfill the law of Christ?" Yeah, of course I want to fulfill the law of Christ. So do you remember what he says in verse 14? Love your neighbor as yourself. You go, whoa, Paul, wait a second, a little senior moment there? You forgot the important part. You're supposed to love God with all your heart, soul, and your mind, and then you love your neighbor as yourself. So you got to love your neighbor, but you got to first love God, and you separate them. But Paul just simply says, you want to fulfill the law of Christ, the most important thing Christ said? Love your neighbor as yourself. Well, if maybe he had a senior moment, he just kind of forgot the first part. Well, if he did, then the half-brother of Jesus did as well. James chapter 2, verse 8. James says, you want to fulfill the royal law of God? Hello? Sure I do. So he says, you want to fulfill the royal law of God? And he says the same thing Paul says. Love your neighbor as yourself. Now, how do both these guys forget the important part? Unless they did not forget the important part. See, do you think God's going to really trust us? That all he's got to say is, you love me with all your heart, soul, and mind, and you figure out how to do it. Oh, man, that's why we have 30,000 denominations all fighting each other because they think they got the corner on how to love God. Remember, you read when you had those folks chop heads off in Egypt of those Christian men because they thought that would be loving their God. And so God doesn't trust us as far as He can throw us. He's not going to say, you're on your own on figuring out how you're supposed to love me. He says, I'll tell you how I am loved. You love God with all your heart, your soul, your mind. And here's how you love me. You love me by loving my people, those I created in my own image. You love me by loving them. And that's why they could see that this man was all about truth. He would not forget what God said. Especially the most important thing God said. People saw the way he treated people. And see, that's the mark. People can see how we treat people. If you don't believe it, do what I've done from time to time. Go to the mall and just get a Coke, get something to drink. Just sit there for about a half hour to an hour and watch how people treat each other. Just watch. No wonder when you're kind or you smile or you acknowledge somebody, people are usually shocked and they're usually surprised. Because the mark of remembering what God has said, and the most important thing is I don't even know you. And that's why, as we said last week, he's going to talk about the purest way to see God loving through us is the way we treat strangers. Here, we'll go on, you'll see it. So he says, verse 3 again, I was very glad when brethren came and bore witness to your truth. What truth? That is, how you are walking in truth. You're living out your life like you're not forgetting what God has said. I mean, how many Christians, they live their lives like they forget that God has anything to say. It's called practical atheism. It's not much different than atheism. Because this is how it is seen, is the way you treat people. The way you treat people. He says, I have no greater joy. John says, I have no greater joy than this, to hear of my children walking in the truth. Now again, break out of the metaphor. I could say, I'm a man that just walks in the truth. You go, oh, you're such a holy man. You have no idea what I just said. That's why we got to break down and see, well, what is that? Walking in aletheon. What's walking in aletheon? Walking as if I do not forget what God has said. And it is most clearly seen in the way I treat people. Now he says, beloved again, Gaius, you are acting faithfully in whatever you accomplish for the brethren, and especially when they are strangers. I love this phrase, you are acting faithfully. He's saying, you do faith. It's interesting, you do faith. What is faith? I've had people say, I don't believe in faith, I'm intelligent. I say, well, good, I am too, because I don't believe in faith either. Because faith isn't something you believe in. Faith is something you believe with. And we all live by faith. We all trust something or trust somebody. Like I told you before, I worked my way through college at McDonald's. And you have no idea, what we did back there, And yet you buy your McDonald's. Don't tell me you don't trust the people behind the grill. Or like I've said before, you jump on an airplane. You don't know if the door's locked. The pilots may be having a cocktail party for all you know. And you have not seen the maintenance records, and yet you put your little backside down there. They put that thing on fire. Off you go, and you tell me you don't live by faith. Everybody is trusting somebody or something. But it's interesting about this. Faith is trusting, not just believing. Even the demons, James says, even the demons believe. Does the devil believe Jesus is God's son? Yeah. He believes it more than you do. Does he believe that Jesus was the Christ, God's provision for forgiveness? Does he believe the elements of the gospel? James says, yeah, but he's the devil. Because he does not trust what he believes. And that's what faith is. Faith is trusting what you believe. The other way to see faith is through obedience. Obedience to what or who you're trusting. If I say I trust you and you tell me to do something and I don't do it, I've just denied the fact I trust you. But here's the kicker. Obedience isn't that difficult. It really is not that difficult. Agreement is. So you have no trouble obeying what you agree with. It's no big deal. The thing we struggle with is agreeing that what God says is wise. That's what Job was struggling with. Job did pretty well. He never turns back on God. No, he slay me, I will not, But at the same time, he wanted to sue God. He wanted to go to court of heaven and sue God because this wasn't right. So he was struggling. And remember, God comes back at him in Job 38 and says, who are you? Are you now my counselor? Were you around when I created the heavens and the earth? Or are you now going to teach me? The whole book of Job is God's infinite mind trying to be understood by our finite, piniony little brains. And trying to get this into this, there will be spillage. And that's called mystery. So I'm left to have to make a choice. Am I going to trust the infinite wisdom of God or am I not? Will I agree what way God's handling my life? See, obedience to what God says is not hard. But agreement is hard. Now, when God does things that I understand, and they fit into my little brain, those are easy to obey. So I don't beat up my wife, I don't cheat. There's some things that God says just make sense. But there's some stuff that I have to go through, some stuff you go through that this little brain does not compute how this is making any sense at all. Now, at that point, I have to trust. But what do you think James 1:5 is all about when you encounter various trials? It says, if you lack wisdom, ask of God, who giveth freely. And what the prayer of James 1:5 is when you ask for wisdom is, God, I'm going to trust what I believe, and I believe you have infinite wisdom. I'm going to trust your wisdom, even though it makes no sense to me. But God, soften my self-willfulness, because help me to have agreement. Because it makes my Christian walk a lot easier. It makes obedience a lot easier. If you could just help me see some wisdom on why. And have some agreement. Why that boy won't call me and take me out. Or whatever it might be. I want to make sure I keep her awake. So the point being is this. He says that I am so proud. You are doing faith. You are obeying because you have agreement with what God has said. Therefore, truth. You walk in the truth. And notice he says, especially when they are strangers. You see, if I care and I initiate actions of self-sacrifice to meet needs that I know God says you have, and so I love my friends, I love my family, but that love could be coming right from my own flesh. Because if I know you, I may give you a bill, or I'm hoping for a hug, or I want to be liked. I mean, I'm as shallow as junior high. Like me, I'll like you, I can't get over that thing. And so, how do I know that it's God's love for me that's being shed out and splashed onto others? It's when I'm loving strangers. That's the real test. So the way you treat each other, who cares? I mean, I care, of course. I want you, don't fight, be at peace, love one another. Yeah, but we already have agreement on that. I'm more interested in how do you treat strangers? How do you treat strangers? And the stranger they are, how do you treat them? He goes on and he says this, verse 6. And these people that are talking about Gaius, because they see that he's walking in truth, loving, treating strangers. He says, and they bear witness to your love before the church. Man, talk about church gossip. They're gossiping about this guy, but they're gossiping about this guy as such an influence. It says, so because you have so much influence, you will do well to send them on their way in a manner worthy of God. Now, what does it mean, send them? Who's the them they're sending? Well, read on. Verse 7. For they went out for the sake of the name, accepting nothing from the Gentiles. Remember these churches. They were sending out evangelists, people sharing the gospel, missionaries. They were sending out people. But these people have to eat. These people have to live. Remember the problem in 2 John? You had these itinerant teachers, and they would come and they would teach, and then they would go ahead and stay in the homes of these people and be supported or receive a greeting and be encouraged. Well, he says in 2 John, don't do it for false teachers, but do it for teachers that are bringing the gospel. I'll tell you, I'm really grateful for this because for over 53 years, it's people like you who have supported people like me, so that we pastors or we ministers or missionaries or counselors or whatever it is, we're freed up. You guys say, do you have a photographic mind? I ran out of film years ago, all right? No. But because there are people like you who would support people like me, I was freed up to be able to spend those hours in study and research and learning Hebrew, learning Greek, and learning the theology, and so that I can, and we'll see in a moment, what am I supposed to do with it all? Serve you. So he says here that they went out for the sake of the name. These are those that are going out to share Christ, to establish churches, accepting nothing from the Gentiles. Gentiles are pagans here. They're not going to help. Therefore, we ought to support such men. That word support literally means to come underneath and lift up. We have a term in banking called to underwrite. To underwrite, to lift up, to support, so that they can be about that which they've been called to do. And if you do that, he says that we may be fellow workers with the truth. Fellow workers. Have you heard the word synergy? Synergy. When you have people come together and then there's energy that's even greater than individually. That's from this word is synergos. That's where we get the word synergy. He says you actually participate. So if you're supporting, missionaries or pastors, or you give to your church, so these pastors are freed up to do their ministry, what you're doing is you're participating. Synergy. As far as God's concerned, you might as well be doing it yourself. People guys say, well, they just make out a check. You ought to do more than just make out a check. No, make out the pick and check. If that's all you can do, that makes you just as much of a partner as the person who jumps on the plane with the person and goes to Africa and does the work, because somebody has to lift them up from underneath. Someone has to support. Then he goes and he says this. Now, he says, here's my problem, and here's why I'm writing the letter. I wrote something to the church, but Diotrephes, who loves to be first among them, does not accept what we say. So here's a guy and a leader in the church, and he's not going to do what the Apostle John, the last living eyewitness to Jesus Christ's resurrection, he's going to take John on. It says, for this reason, if I come, he says, I will call attention to his deeds, which he does, unjustly accusing us with wicked words, and not satisfied with this, neither does he himself receive the brethren. And he forbids those who desires to do so. Watch this. And he puts them out of the church. This guy has squirmed into the elder board. This guy has become one of the leaders of the church, so he has such authority. He can say the church, you're not allowed to do that. And if you do that, I'll put you out of the church. Who is this guy? Diotrephes. Now, interesting, Diotrephes gives you a little clue. John says this guy's pretty much full of himself. Remember, he says in verse 9, I wrote something to the church, but Diotrephes, who loves to be first among them, does not accept what we say. What says, I want to be first among you? Well, his very name. There was the pagan Greeks, when they came to Christ, they would change their name from a pagan name to a Christian name. This was a tradition that's gone on to this day. My dad was Roman Catholic, and he was born Darryl DelHousaye. Darryl DelHousaye. But when he was baptized as a child, his name was changed to John DelHousaye. And it's something that's done today. Well, Diotrephes. Dios means Zeus. Trepho means nourished by. So this guy's name means nourished by Zeus. Now, in one sense, it's really not his fault because his parents gave him the name. What is his fault? He's kept the name. Now, for me, it's kind of like having your name Buddha Saves. I might want to change, my name in Spanish for Buddha Saves. Now, I've thought about changing my name because Darryl means from the region of wild animals. And, and I thought, you don't like that either, I like Duke. That's why it's going to be Duke, remember? But the fact being is here is right away the fact that he goes by this name. And this was a name where Gaius was a very common name among people. This was a very unique name among the nobility. And so this guy is used to being treated as nobility. Now he apparently becomes a believer, I guess. And as a believer, he's used to leading. He's very smart, he's very intelligent, and he's used to being nobility. So they move him right up to be one of the elders, one of the leaders with authority and care over the church. But he had totally forgotten what Jesus taught about this. Matter of fact, Jesus knew as he would build his church and the gates of hell would not prevail against it, Jesus even described the leadership and what the leadership was to be like. It was an interesting situation what had happened. Is in Matthew 20, in verse 20, says, and now the mother of the sons of Zebedee. Now, sons of Zebedee, that's John, our John, who's writing these letters, and his brother James. And their mom shows up to Jesus. And she bows down and she makes a request of him. And he says, what is it that you wish? She says, well, command that in your kingdom these two sons of mine may sit, one on the right and one on the left. This is a really great Jewish mother. I want my one son to be a lawyer and my other son to be a doctor. You know, it's this kind of thing. So she comes and she wants her two boys to be, because she's believing Jesus is going to knock off Rome, be the king of the kingdom, and she wants her boys to be top dogs. Well, the only thing is Jesus says, first of all, the kingdom that I'm going to be ruling will be a gift basically from the Father. So the Father places who's going to have what authorities in the kingdom, not me. But then it says, and in hearing this, verse 24, the 10 became indignant at the two brothers. Now, why were the 10 angry at the two brothers? Well, because they didn't get their mother there before these guys did, right? So now they're all saying, who's the greatest in the kingdom? Who's going to have the position leadership in the kingdom? Leadership. Everybody wants to be a leader. But Jesus says, guys, let's talk about this leadership thing. What is leadership? One word, influence. How does one human being influence other human beings? That's the essence of leadership. Now the question is, well, you're born leaders, or your nobility, or your personality determines it. Here's what Jesus says. You know that the rulers of the Gentiles, well, they lord it over them, and their great men exercise authority over them. Now, Jesus has a very interesting thing here. The Greek has a preposition called kata, K-A-T-A. Kata means down. And Jesus puts that preposition before the word Lord, kurios. So he says, in the world, among the Gentiles, how they pick their leaders is first somebody who's kata kurios. Lord means that I'm to be served. I'm to be benefited. Kata krina is that I view you as down below me, and your purpose is to serve and benefit me because I'm the leader. So I use my people. I fleece my people. I use them to carry out my agenda. The second thing they do is they exercise authority over them. Now he does the same thing. He takes that word kata, down, but now he takes the word exousia, which is the word literally authority, but it means the right to make decisions so that your will is carried out by others. That's authority. They take authority and they view you as down, and your purpose is to carry out my decisions. Now, the only problem is that this is the essence of arrogance. It's visions of divinity. Matthew 6, what's the Lord's Prayer? Our Father art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. May you be treated with respect. And thy kingdom come, and your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. The essence of arrogance, we want to be treated, we've talked about this, we want to be treated as a God. And especially those who pursue leadership because they want, first of all, they want to be served, and they want to be benefited, and then they want their will to be done. That's why anybody, and we have elders at our church that care for and responsible for the spiritual care of this church. And other churches have their own elders and leaders. The only trouble is, I remember in my years, I loved elders. But every once in a while, we would get an elder that had a personal agenda. And he would tell us, I became an elder because we need to start doing this more. I became an elder because I'm going to make sure we're going to start doing this. oh man, Lord, just take them home soon. See, I'm praying for them. But the fact is that you have any elder, anybody in leadership, any kind of leadership, and they have a personal agenda, they should be removed. Removed immediately. Well, we're replaced with what? Keep on reading. Jesus says, it is not so among you. That's the biblical basis. Get them out of leadership. He says, but whoever wishes to become great among you shall be your servant. And whoever wishes to be first among you shall be your slave. Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life a ransom for many. Jesus says, no, this is what a leader is all about. I call it servant leadership. I wrote a book on this. Notice he says, first of all, you want to be great, that is, you want to influence people in the church, first be a servant. The word is diakones. We get the word deacon from it. And the essence of diakones is to view that anything you have, any ability, any resources, any gifts, any training, any degrees, they've all been given to you for one reason, and that's to benefit others. It's absolutely the opposite of lording it over. I exist to benefit you. So the issue isn't, am I better? Do I know more? No. Anything I've been given, it's been given for only one reason, to benefit you. And if I use it to benefit myself, now I'm lording it over, and I should be removed. The second one, he says, but if you want to be the leader, the one with the greatest influence for the spiritual care of others, then be a slave. That's the word doulos. And I know a doulos today is women that help women have babies at home or something, but same concept. But a doulos basically spoke of the little slave girl. Now, back in those days, sandals were really popular, all right? And when you walked around your sandals, and there was mud, and there was dirt, and there was other stuff. And so when you came to have a meal at the end of the day, and remember, you didn't sit at tables like this, but you would lean around, short these pillows, and so the guy next to you would have his feet right within a foot of your face. Now, if he got all the steps in that day, you're not going to enjoy your meal. So it was a custom that the lowest of the slaves, the doulos, would have the responsibility of washing your feet. You know the story in John 13. All the guys flop down, stinking everything up. Jesus gets up and says, I'm not going to. And what does Jesus do? He washes their feet. And they're all freaked out about it. And Peter says, no, don't do it to me. He says, I don't wash your feet. We have nothing in common, nothing together. And he says, give me a bath. Peter's kind of extremes, right? Well, all that to say this word doulos was used for the young girl slave. And then she was there, and she actually would be in the corner. Whoa. She'd be in the corner, and she would watch the fingers of the master, because he would signal his will for her with his fingers. The essence of a doulos, they had no self-will. They existed to carry out the will of their master. That's a doulos. That's not saying you're mammy-pammy, you don't have a will. But he's talking about, but when you're serving, when you're functioning, you don't have a personal agenda. You only have one agenda, your master's agenda. And that's why I said, no personal agendas in the church. It's the only one agenda. That's the agenda who heads the church. That's Jesus Christ. And a doulos, the greatest one, who will have the greatest influence, will be the one that has no personal agenda, but only the agenda of what is it that the master wants. And I'm all about carrying out his will. And so, is this Diotrephes? Excuse me, this is the opposite. And that's why John calls him out by name. Wouldn't you like to have your name in the Bible used this way? So this guy got a problem here, and he's refusing to let anybody support good people. He's putting them out of the church if they do this. So in verse 11, John says, Beloved, do not imitate what is evil, but what is good. The one who does good is of God, and the one who does evil has not seen God. You know, it's an interesting thing about this imitate. The word is mimetes, to mimic. Because even Peter writes in 1 Peter 5, when he says, you know, I want to write to my fellow presbyteros, my fellow elders, my fellow leaders, those with the responsibility to spiritual care of others. So he's writing to them. And what he says is simply this: shepherd the flock. So you go, okay, shepherd the flock. Is there two O's in flock? No, that's fluke. Flock. Now, you're ready to take notes. Then Peter says, don't do it under compulsion. Okay, don't do it because I have to. Don't do it for money, sordid gain. Okay, don't do it for money. And don't lord it over. Don't do it so people treat you and benefit you in some way. Okay, do not lord over. Okay, that's what not to do. That's how not to shepherd the flock, like Diotrephes was. Well, then how do you do it? And he says, be examples to the flock. Okay, be examples to the flock. What's number 2? There is no number 2. Well, what's number 3? There's no number 3. That's it. Because Peter knew the greatest influence on other human beings is one's example. Because people, we imitate. They even have called certain cells in our brain, neurons, mirror cells, mirror neurons. Because it's our nature to imitate. We do that as children, and we imitate what we see. Greatest influence is the example. I think one of the great examples is, have you ever heard the name Roger Bannister? Roger Bannister, he was a young man. We always wanted to be able to run a mile less than 4 minutes, called the 4-minute mile. Even the Greeks, you know, they would run fast, and soon they started to be able to time racing. Nobody could ever run 1 mile faster than 4 minutes. And they had an explanation of human structure, the skeleton, the resistance of air. It was just felt it was impossible. That was until 1954 in London. There was a race, and this young man named Roger Bannister ran it in 3 minutes, 59.4 seconds. And the world went berserk. They broke the 4-minute mile. Now, what's interesting to me is just 10 years later, 336 had done it. As of April 2021, 1,663 have done it. Matter of fact, just last week I did it. No, I didn't. I didn't want to do it. Anyway, he says the fact we will, even biologically with these mirror neurons apparently, that we will imitate what we see. And that's why choose who you hang out with. Yeah, we love strangers, we care, but who do I let influence me? I let my leaders influence me. And I'm very picky on who I permit to influence me. And what is it? I want to have to be like them. Because they're like Christ. And I want to be like Christ. So somebody may have a title. I'm an elder here at this church. I'm the pastor. I'm one of the pastors. I'm a lead. Fine. I want to know what kind of pastor, what kind of leader. And may I ask you a question? All your authority and power and talent, do you see that it is to benefit others? And then are you driven by simply the will of your master and you have no personal agenda? That's what you ask. And then they will call back at another time when they have a good answer for that. Well, he closes when he says this, verse 12. Demetrius. Now, who is Demetrius? He's one of the guys that John endorses, that John wants to send out as a missionary, as an evangelist, as a teacher. Demetrius has received a good testimony from everyone. And from truth itself, people observe one thing in this guy's life. He hasn't forgotten what God said. And you can see it. Mostly by seeing the way he treats what? People, and specifically strangers. And John says, we also bear witness. And you know that our witness is true. I had many things to write to you. Now he gives a same like he did in the other letter. Right when it was getting juicy. He's going to get real personal with this lady. we're going to do it face to face. I'm not going to put that in ink. Well, he does the same thing here. He says, I had many more things to write to you, but I'm not willing to write them to you with pen and ink. But I hope to see you shortly. We shall speak face to face. He does the same thing with the lady. There's something about face to face. I understand. I understand live stream. I understand venue churches. My own churches, venue churches. And maybe it's have to do. COVID was what a wonderful thing when people learned you could stay home, have a cup of coffee, and watch your whole service from your front room. Many, many churches have not recovered. Their people are staying home. Now, the remarkable thing is not so much happening here, which is a great thing. But people ask me, why should we come together? Well, the answer is simple. It's Hebrews chapter 10, verse 25. He says, do not forsake the gathering of yourself together, which is the habit of some, but to stimulate one another to love and good deeds. The word stimulate speaks of a long pole with a sharp end. You stimulated cattle. It apparently can be translated to irritate, which is a gift my wife says that I have. The point is face to face. Why? How else do we mimic? You do not really imitate or mimic anything you see on live stream. You mimic face to face. That's how we influence each other. How do we encourage and motivate each other in our faith and our walking in truth? By reminding each other what God has said, truth, but also by being examples of it, starting with the leadership. So you mimitate, you mimic. So I want to talk to you, gays, face to face. Peace be to you. The friends greet you. Greet the friends by name. Word peace, that's interesting. Have you ever had to ask people, ask you to pray for them? And the good thing to do is do it right then, because you're going to forget, then you're a liar. So you don't want to do that. But then people will say, will you pray for my bunion? Lord, I pray for this bunion. I don't know. And Romans 8:26 says I have a flaw, a weakness. I don't know how to pray as I should, because I don't always know what the will of God is. Maybe God's will is for your picking foot to fall off because you're arrogant. I don't know. So I don't know how to pray for you. And so I have my list of people I pray for, my family, and I many times wondering, Lord, what do you say to somebody that knows everything? God, I got a suggestion on how you could be a better God. God, we got this situation. Let me give you some counsel on how to handle it, because this will make you wiser. And I started going, who, what? The book of Job keeps coming back. Oh, God will smack you down, and you start counseling him. There's a riddle when I was a junior high pastor we used to throw out. And the riddle is simply this, comes out of Isaiah 48. What is it that God has never seen? Great men and women see it from time to time. And you and me, we see it every day. Every day. What is it that God has never seen? Great men and women have seen it from time to time, but you and I see it every day. The answer is very, very simple. God has never seen his equal. Great men and women see their equal from time to time, and you and I, we see our equal every day. The fact is, it does come down to God's wisdom, and God knows. So how do I pray? Notice how it does for Gaius, whom he loves deeply. He prays for Gaius right here, with the ending by praying for what? Peace. I find that when I am praying for people I know, people I don't know, I know at least the will of God is that Jesus said, I came to give peace. I pray, Lord, give them peace. Just give them peace. And that's something you can pray for anybody. And that's something I'd always want you to pray for me. And that's how he ends the letter. And that means we're done. Almost. Remember I told you next week we're going to meet one more time before our holiday break. And then we're going to holiday. Okay? By the way, when people kind of, say, what is it? Christmas. Oh, they'll say, I don't know, we Christians get really upset. And we're supposed to rebuke people when people say, happy holiday. That's what it is. So you're at the store and someone goes, well, happy holiday. It's not a happy holiday. It's Christmas. Do you deny Jesus Christ? You know, don't do that. Don't do that. Because holiday literally means what? Holy day. So you just respond back with the correct pronunciation. And happy holy day to you as well. And then shut up and leave and take, no, that's all. See, I can't wait till I'm 80. Anyhow, for next week, we're just going to do a Q&A. Asked you to email me questions that you have. I've already, this week, good. Boy, these are good. So if you love Jesus, you'll come again one more time. And that will be next Tuesday. Feel free, again, I gave you my email. And ddel@ps.edu, or you can get it here at the church. And send me your questions, and what we'll simply do is, so many people are here, I'll sit down there and I'll do my best to answer your questions from the Scriptures. Not just opinions, but from the Scriptures. And maybe we can serve you that way. God bless you. Thank you for coming. Have a great day.